Sonic is a good game. But what if I told you that you can play it portably? Well, what if I told you there's this thing called a Sega Nomad? Yeah, you can play your Genesis games portably. But most importantly, you can play Sonic portably. Sucks I don't have one, so I mean, hey. Guess we gotta go on eBay. Oh. Well, that thing costs an arm and a leg. Too bad I don't have a saw. You're probably thinking, oh, Mungary, you spend hundreds of dollars on things like it's normal. Yeah, well, I just bought a Nuon controller. Well, I can't flex this way, so I gotta flex and somehow. This is a fucking Sonic video. What if I told you that there is one way that you can play Sonic the Hedgehog portably? Okay, it looks like the coast is clear. It's time to play Sonic the Hedgehog on the Game Boy Advance. Hey, I know him! Well, I mean, what'd you expect? It's Sonic the Hedgehog. I mean, I don't know what you really expected. So, playing through the game, the video that you saw, the music is just a little bit off, which makes sense because this is running on Game Boy Advance versus the Genesis. But couldn't they replicate it a little bit better? I mean, this is hardware from 2003 versus hardware from 1989. Whatever, it's small, whatever. There's also screen crunch, which is also something you'd expect from a handheld. But here is the biggest problem with this, in my opinion. Frame rate issues. The frame rate issues on this version of Sonic the Hedgehog are worse than the Genesis. You want to know how that doesn't make sense? This came out in 2003. This model of the Game Boy Advance came out in 2003, and the Genesis came out in 1989. And the Genesis version runs better. How the hell does that make sense? I mean, unless you fucking got a time machine, you know, maybe Mario's fucking time machine, and you went back in time and say, ooh, this game sucked on Game Boy Advance, let's make it better on Genesis. And that's another thing, say, because they got Mario World, which I get it, Mario World is a slower paced game. But they got Mario World to run way better on the Game Boy Advance than the Super Nintendo, which, mind you, the Super Nintendo was more powerful than the Genesis. I don't understand how they possibly fucked up. I just pulled out a game out of my Game Boy Advance I was on. I don't understand how they could have fucked up so badly. I mean, I'm overreacting a little bit. It's not that bad. But man, it's just bad enough. You might as well just buy a Nomad. Sell this, cut off your leg if you have a saw, and just go buy a Nomad. Which I guess is kind of counterproductive. Because if you cut your leg off, then you might as well just be staying home to play on Genesis. Either way. Overall, it's kind of neat, I guess. It was in the era where Sega was like, oh shit, we have the Dreamcast, but the Dreamcast is, it's already on its deathbed, even though it's 2-3 years old at this point. It's already on its deathbed, so we're just gonna port all our games to Nintendo systems. So they have like Sonic the Hedgehog on Game Boy Advance, Monkey Ball or Super Monkey Ball. One was a launch title for the GameCube. You can download the mobile app. There is a mobile app of Sonic the Hedgehog that runs better than this on your phone if you're okay with using the touchscreen for your controller. Just download it for free on your phone. So, this is a cool little piece in my collection, I guess, even though it's stored in a binder and not shown on display like the rest of my shit anyways. From it. There's better games on Game Boy Advance, like the Mario Advance series, or Pokemon games if you can afford them. There's just better options.